Hi everyone, and welcome back to SwitchUp.
Yeah, welcome back to day 3 of the 12 days of SwitchUp. Today we are going to do games that put AAA games to shame. So indie games that, you know, give such a good account of themselves that they could have been made by these huge studios with bundles and bundles of money.
I think it's fair to say that this has actually got easier to make over the years. We've had so many good indie games released.
Yeah.
Do let us know, as always, in the comments, the ones that you think we haven't mentioned because we can't play everything.
Yeah, exactly right. And obviously some of these would have been in previous videos of this nature. We're going to try and focus on 2023, but it would be remiss of us to miss some great games off. So we'll throw a few from previous years in there too.
I would have liked to have been talking about Silksong, but we won't mention that.
Yeah, another year. But there we go. And just before we start, a quick thank you to our sponsor for this series, Untold Tales. We will highlight one of their games during this episode. So which games do put AAA games to shame? Well, let's find out.
Big thanks to the sponsor of all of these episodes, Untold Tales, and today they have their game Everdream Valley. This is down to £11.24. You can see the prices and discounts at the bottom of your screen, but we actually did a full dedicated video on this one when it came out, and I have to say I've been following it since it came, and it's had a load of patchwork, which is really nice to see. Now the core gameplay is very fun, and it'll be familiar to people that like things like Stardew Valley. You have to manage, maintain and run your own farm. There are lots of side quests and errands to do. You can corral different animals and herd them into pens, and you can milk cows, as I discovered in what is quite possibly one of the funniest mini-games I've ever seen. If you're interested in knowing more, then do go and check out our full video on this one. I'll pop a link to it in the description. But big thanks to Untold Tales for sponsoring this and all the other 12 Days of SwitchUp episodes.
The first game we want to mention then is Dredge, which was developed by Black Salt Games, albeit it was published by Team 17. This is a very difficult one to describe in some respects. You basically play as a fisherman who goes about his daily business of going out into the ocean, catching fish, obviously dredging for treasure, but it's all done with an undertone of Lovecraft, whereby there is something unknown under the sea, and you need to be back by nightfall if you want to avoid the horrors. But obviously the caveat is that a lot of the stuff you need is out there at night. And obviously you'll make your way across a number of different islands, across the ocean, to different islands, and you'll take on different tasks and objectives as you go. I love this game.
Yeah.
Really very good game.
It's the definition of a cult classic. It's instantly become a cult classic. People love this game.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just the gameplay mechanic, which is handled well, albeit you are doing the same thing quite often. It never feels completely repetitive because, you know, there is a reason for it. You know, you feel like what you're doing is for a greater good almost. You know, you have to get to your objectives. But just the horror itself, the way that's handled. Lovecraft is a very difficult concept, you know, in terms of how he handled his horror to pull off on screen in any form, because a lot of what he wrote was deliberately vague so that the reader, as it would have been then, conjured up images in their own mind. And this is one of the best ways I've seen Lovecraft handled in any medium.
Brilliant. There are expansions out as well already that add more story content to it, which is nice.
Yeah, for sure. I've not tried those. I think one is story content and the other is other bits and bobs. But yeah, there's that for sure.
All right, so starting with a bit of a bang there, I would say. Incredible developer has done a great job. And another developer that has done a great job with their game is Hello Games with No Man's Sky. Now, it's weird to not even, you know, to think that this isn't a AAA. You know, this is a small team who initially released a game in a bit of a state and then spent years and years and years adding in all the things that they'd promised. Like Sean Murray, the head of this team, is a bit of a meme. You know, there's many jokes about him just because he promised like the world. And then his recent game that he's just announced, he got up on stage and was like, yeah, we're going to build the Earth. And like you see his dev team just kind of go, oh no. But he will make it. And with No Man's Sky, the patches they release end up being huge additional story elements. You know, like this is one of the few games where you really can go to any planet without any loading. You know, you can just fly down to the surface, land in a canyon, build a house. It has full base building mechanics, take off, go somewhere else. You can see everyone else's discoveries in there. I mean, it's a technical masterpiece on that front. It's like, how does that even work? But yeah, I'm really keen to see what they do next. I do think No Man's Sky deserves the recognition that it's finally getting, and very, very, very different to Dredge. You know, the stories, they are here, but they're not nearly as handcrafted in that aspect. It's very much your experience. But yeah, well worth experiencing.
It's probably one of, if not the biggest redemption arcs in gaming history, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd say it probably is the biggest.
The biggest, yeah.
That I've ever seen. Off the back of that one then, we've got Born of Bread. Now, I would say with things like Paper Mario, which we've spoken about recently, they set the benchmark for this style.
Yeah.
You know, that's what the benchmark is. So Born of Bread has to do something unique. And I think it does it in a few different ways. The humour, while again, you said that was something that Paper Mario had.
Yes, it is, yeah, for sure.
It's done in a way here that almost reminded me of like Ren and Stimpy.
Right.
You know, it's quite like dark.
Yeah.
You know, and I do like dark humour.
Yeah.
I really do. Like even the way he pops out of the oven and it's a bit horrific that this little like child creature's coming out of an oven, you know. It's like, okay. Now, as we said, we were chatting about earlier, the Switch version did launch with a few bugs. You know, there's a few little bugs here and there, but the team are well aware of it. It hasn't had a great deal of recognition. I would say check out the demo.
Yeah.
You know, that will give you a good idea of what to expect from it. But you've got those turn-based active battles. It is going to get a few mentions, I think, over our 12 days of SwitchUp, so I won't harp on about it too much. But I think it deserves its place in this list. It looks beautiful. It's got good polish, aside from a couple of bugs that slipped through on the Switch version. I have to say I did play the PS5 version. And it comes from Wild Art Studios.
What's quite interesting is I'm relatively sure that on one of our lists of this type in a previous 12 days series, we mentioned Bug Fables.
Yes.
Which is very similar in that respect of obviously taking inspiration from Paper Mario, but doing something that's worthy of mention in its own right.
Absolutely.
And it's nice to see another studio doing the same again, really. Next then we have SIGNALIS. Now this comes from Rose Engine, which was originally a two-person team, albeit, people joined as the game grew in stature, composers, what have you. Now this is a kind of a top-down horror game set in space, has like a sci-fi theme. Similar, I guess, to something like the earlier Metal Gear Solid games in some ways, whilst also having elements of like the earlier Resident Evil games in there too.
Okay, that's interesting. How does that work?
So the top-down view is definitely more Metal Gear.
Yeah.
It doesn't have like fixed camera perspectives like the earlier Resident Evil games did, but anything else gameplay-wise borrows heavily from those games, you know, resource management, things like that. As you make your way through these space stations, and there's obviously been something gone horrifically wrong, and you'll find out more as you play. I finished this, I think it might have even been last Christmas. It was one of the games I finished off. It takes about, I don't know, I'd say 12 to 15 hours, I guess. There are a number of different endings that you can get depending on decisions you make as you play through, and it's a very well crafted game if you like that kind of old school horror way of doing things, you know. It was one of the best games I'd played in that style in a long time.
Yeah, it's another, a bit like Dredge, that has built up a real following.
Yeah.
People are like, actually, do you know what? This sits among the best in the
Yeah,
genre.
for sure. It's just nice sometimes to see a team unapologetically go for something that's been done before, not done so much in this day and age, and show how good it can be in this day and age, you know?
Absolutely perfect. All right, so then we've got one that's been out for a long, long time, but it's one that keeps popping up on your list, and it's Dodgeball Academia.
Yeah, Dodgeball Academia. So this is a turn-based RPG, basically, but it's set in a school of dodgeball. You play as a character who will kind of have a team thrust upon them as they go along, and you're kind of fighting against other dodgeball teams as you move through the story, albeit the story does get a bit bigger than just dodgeball, and you'll take on kind of enemies that you'll encounter as you go. You can use, the battles take place on the dodgeball field.
Yeah.
Maybe turn-based is not the right idea. I suppose it's a bit more active in terms of you are playing dodgeball and you're having to kind of catch the ball to then retaliate and attack back, you know. But each character has their own special powers. It's a very interesting hybrid in terms of how it plays. Very good game, lovely art style, nice kind of hand-drawn, very chirpy, very, very chipper looking. But yeah, one well worth picking up, and the team behind this was Pocket Trap.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that, because it is it's a master rather than a jack of all. Whereas things like Sports Story, if you remember that release,
Yes, yeah.
they really dropped the bag on that one. They dropped the ball.
Themselves a bit too thin, didn't they? Yeah.
Totally. Okay, so then we have Naps Team's Baldo. Now, Baldo, however you want to say it, is a two-person Italian team who've worked on this. Two best pals have worked on this one together. One does the art, the other does all the programming and all of that stuff.
Okay.
And Baldo released in a bad way, and then over the years, a bit like, I guess, No Man's Sky, they've gradually added on new free content updates. And they just released the last one, which is called like the final chapter. And it was just such a good way of finishing the story. I think the only, not negative, but it's one of those where this is the true end.
Yep.
You know, so if you'd have played it back in the day, I don't think you've really experienced the proper ending. They kind of alluded to it, but from what I understand, they literally ran out of time and resource.
Right.
You know, and now they've finally finally been able to revisit it and go, this is how we want the game to end.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a good ending. It's in a completely different setting. It doesn't feel like the same world, and that's all intrinsic to its design, as you'll see when you play it, but it still manages to turn the whole school into a Zelda-like dungeon.
Nice.
Which is very clever. Yeah, really clever. You unlock different rooms and areas of the school, and you'll meet a lot of characters from the fantasy side and be like, hang on, I recognise them. And again, that's explained. I'm purposely being vague.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Yeah, again, so it's nice to see another kind of redemption cycle, isn't it, in terms of a game starting off with grand intentions, I'm sure, and not quite hitting them, and maybe disappointing a few people along the way, but sticking to their guns and keeping those promises ultimately, which is nice, and delivering something that's well worth playing.
Absolutely. So then we've got BOMBRUSH Cyberfunk. Now, I don't think you saw the other day, Glenn, there was a big announcement from Sega that they're going to revisit a lot of their classics.
Okay.
So they're going to redo all of Crazy Taxi. They're going to be redoing Jet Set Radio.
Yeah, nice. Yeah.
There's a load of them. There's a load of games they're going to be bringing back out new versions of. But BOMBRUSH Cyberfunk felt like a spiritual successor to Jet Set Radio.
Yeah.
And it did it better, I've got to be honest. You know, we do remember things with rose-tinted glasses very often.
Absolutely.
But this was so good. It wasn't just like a rollerblades. You had like a skateboard in there, a BMX. But the way that you kind of approach this world, and the world's large and it gets bigger, and it's like interconnected areas that are basically big skate parks.
Right.
The way that it delivered its story and everything was how best to describe it? It was like pro grade, like it was AAA.
Yeah.
Right. It was AAA. Everything about it, the way it looks like, the way it performed. It was a bit of a shock, I think, because there wasn't much information, and then it launched, and I think I remember saying to you, like, this is amazing. This is a really good game. And what I like, and what a lot of games don't seem to do these days, is it includes things that aren't even necessary.
Yeah.
You know, like you can stop and dance. Do you know what I mean? Like you stop and do a little dance over here, and actually to change characters out, you have to go to a little breakdancing square, do a bit of breakdancing, and then you can select the next one, and they kind of dance on, and then you choose them and skate off.
I remember there's a game called A Boy and His Blob that's been about for forever, back on the NES, but they remade it on the Wii, and it's actually on the Switch as well, funny enough. That had a hug button.
Nice.
You could hug the blob, and it served no purpose. Didn't like refill your health or anything. You just hugged him if you wanted.
Yeah. See, these are the things they don't even bother putting them in anymore, do they?
Yeah.
It's quite it's not dark, but the storyline is a bit dark. It's essentially like it starts out where someone gets decapitated.
Oh wow, okay, that's a way to start, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's horrific.
Yeah.
But then it's not, because you get like a cyber head, and then you go looking for the person that like took your head.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how that works, but apparently it does in this world. Now, this was Team Reptile, and really, really good game. I highly recommend checking that one out.
Next time we got one from this year, and that's Sea of Stars.
Yeah, Sabotage Studios, Sea of Stars. I mean, we all knew just from the look of it that it was going to look great. You know, we kind of, you can see exactly what you've got there. It bases itself on like the Trigger series, right, in terms of gameplay styling.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
It is quite simplistic in certain areas, like the story writing. I think it's fair to say it's a little more light-hearted. It doesn't take itself overly seriously, and there are a few people that were complaining about that, saying, "Oh, you know, it sounds like it was written by I don't know, whatever." I don't agree with that at all. I think it focuses on whimsy and charm a little more than some of the games that take themselves a bit more seriously, and it does that well. Now it does have heart to it as well. It does that thing where it builds up the three initial protagonists and their relationship, and it makes for and again it's really difficult not to spoil.
Yeah.
But it makes an unfair situation really intriguing, and it's like, oh, okay, I didn't expect that to happen, but then it carries it through in a really good way. Now, yes, just on a superficial front, it just looks absolutely incredible. Like, it looks stunning. Gameplay is turn-based. It has a few little quirks. There's like a system where you can collect up the power that's dropped by enemies once you've done damage to them, and then use that to do special moves.
Right.
And it has a few little dungeons in there as well that are a little bit more fleshed out than you might have, you might expect. A bit Zelda-y. But it's just a great game. Really, like you've said with the other one, I think you mentioned, is that it does something that's been done before, does it in a really good way.
And I think that's the thing, isn't it? Because a lot of the big studios have stopped making games in this style now. They've moved on to, bigger and supposedly better things. And a lot of these studios are taking up the mantle of what was done once and done very well by these big studios, but obviously refining it with 30 years more studio experience or industry experience, you know?
Absolutely. So yeah, Sea of Stars, again, we got quite a few videos of this one, so if you want to hear a bit more, go and check that one out. Now, I don't know if you've played this next one. It's Cocoon from Geometric Interactive.
Other than knowing it exists, I don't know much about this one at all, I must say.
I don't know if it has a physical on Switch, but if it does, I think this is one that it would tick every box that you have for a game.
Right. Yeah.
I think, you know, it's a little developer. I'm not sure if he's physically little, but it's a small team. And he creates, he does amazing things with scale and perspective.
Yep.
So like you're this little bug creature that like hatches out, you're doing puzzles, it has a lovely kind of low poly art style. But then when you go to face a boss, you almost like jump into what's like a portal, and the world like warps around you and you appear in that stage. It's difficult to explain it.
Right.
But it's technically quite clever.
Yep.
You know, I haven't seen that done before. And in that regard, I think that's the thing that puts it on this list for me. Gameplay wise, you're fighting bosses, you're doing puzzles, and it has to be said the puzzles are very clever. But the technical aspects of it, I find so impressive because it's such a small team and I haven't seen bigger teams do the same.
Yeah. I'd like to just mention another game that isn't on the list. It could well have been, should well have been perhaps, because for the exact same reason.
Yeah.
It's a game called World of Horror.
Okay.
And what your line, what you just said there is exactly what popped into my head as you said it, is it's basically a game that no one else has made.
Yeah.
And it puts them to shame for even attempting it, you know what I mean? And it's basically a horror game where you see some very surreal stuff happen. It's set in Japan in the 80s. And it's a choose your own adventure story, you know, the classic text-based adventure game. Hasn't been done for eons, you know, donkey's years now. And just for the brass neck of trying it these days. And it's a great game besides that. But yeah, well worth mentioning, you know?
Yeah, that looks really interesting. Finally then, last but not least, we've got Cassette Beasts from Bitten Studio.
Okay, yep.
Now, it launched badly on Switch.
Right.
It launched badly. How many times have I said that? The performance was a shocker. They have revisited a few times, but it's up to a standard I understand now that is actually worth visiting. But what they have done that AAA can't do is make the right Pokemon game.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. Like, I know people hardcore fans seem to love the latest Pokemon. I think most people can look at it and be like, okay, there's a lot you could do here.
Yeah.
But with this one, they kind of take that 80s vibe and they put it into a universe where you capture creatures and record them on cassette tapes.
Yeah, it's very clever.
I love that.
Very clever idea, yeah.
Yeah, it's set on an island called New Wirral, and I think it was Asdin that reviewed this one for us. But he was adamant that, you know, the way that you kind of evolve those creatures, you know, and it gives statistics to their different abilities and stuff. And I think you can can you merge two different ones together or something? I seem to remember him saying something.
I believe so, yes, yeah.
It worked perfectly. Now, I know a lot of people in our audience mentioned how much they love this one. So yeah, you'll probably have to add a bit more detail in because it wasn't us that did the review for this, but very much from the community, it's been suggested as one that it puts AAA to shame in a lot of regards. So that's Cassette Beasts.
All right, so that's 10 games that put AAA to shame.
It is indeed. This is about take 47, by the way, hence the reason that I'm laughing. But yeah, please do let us know of any that you would like to add to this list. Like we said, because we were going across the whole life of the Switch, there's so much that we could have picked from. But these are some cracking games, I reckon.
Absolutely. As always, we are giving away that, not as always, but for this series, we are giving away a Nintendo Switch OLED to one lucky person, thanks to one very kind subscriber. Just leave your comments down below and we'll choose someone at the end of the 12 days. And once again, a massive thank you to Untold Tales. Please do go check out their publisher sale, where you can save up to 90% off on some really good games. All the links will be in the description and the top pinned comment.
For sure. Don't forget, if you're looking to save a bit of money, you can get your eShop cards via our website, switchup.gg. You'll get yourself 5% back in cashback of your purchase price and another 5% straight discount if you use the code SwitchUp.
Lovely stuff. All right, for all things Switch all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers, guys. See ya.
This is sad. That is sad. I think you've got to retire it, man.
Yeah, it's done. It's done.
Done.
It's done.
R.I.P.
Can I just say see you later? See you later. I need a new catchphrase. Nah, just confused. I've just spat on you there. Sorry, bro. Isn't that the worst? You're having a conversation. Have you ever done that? You're like opposite someone and you see the spit come across like a mean to your right.
And you know, like the platoon music.
Yeah. No. It's terrible because you can't acknowledge it either, can you?
No,
you're like,
keep on talking.
No. Like there is a noticeable shudder.
Yeah.
I don't think you can help the initial shudder when it lands, but it is bad, isn't it?
That's when you're lit.
Oh, I've had that.
Can't move. and you can't lick your lip, and you've got to stand there for the rest of the conversation like this, just sweating. Go away for this. I need to remove this from me.